Okay, gouache. Gouache is an opaque watercolor, and it's somewhat akin to tempera or poster paint, but it's a little more refined than that. And it's been around for centuries. Rembrandt painted in gouache when he did a lot of his preliminary work and just his sketching. So it has a long history. It's used quite a bit by textile and surface designers and illustrators and other graphic artists. So it is a very popular medium. One of the things about it is that its light reflective quality is really superlative. You can get velvet finishes that have no sheen, that are totally opaque and flat and really rich and beautiful. So it's a really fun and satisfying medium to work in. So first of all, it is water-based, so you're not going to be using linseed oils or turpentine or anything like that. Second of all, you can't use it directly out of the tube without adding some water to it. So what I'm doing is squeezing out some into a paint pot. This will work better in a paint pot rather than an open palette. One of the reasons for using a paint pot is that you can actually save your color by popping a lid onto it, and it will actually stay moist for several weeks. And even if it does dry out and even do this sort of thing, you can add water to it and reconstitute it. You can't do that with acrylic. But obviously we can't paint with it like this. So what we need to do is add water. And the way I do that is just taking my brush and adding water just by drawing the brush itself across the lip of the paint pot, and the surface tension will pull the water down into the pot. And you can do this method, or you can use an eyedropper, or spoon it in, but this is the quickest way for me. And then once you get some water in there, then you want to start mixing it with the paint itself. And you don't want to get too much water, but you don't want to have too little either. If the paint is feeling sticky to your brush, it needs more water. If you can see through the paint to the bottom of the paint pot, you need more paint for this project. You can paint transparently with gouache, but not for this project. So we want something that doesn't really leave much of a wake. It's probably the consistency of thick cream. It doesn't feel sticky, and there's basically a slow drip. And it rolls around fairly comfortably, and also you need to make sure you are thoroughly mixed. And then you just get down on your painting, on your substrate. And I'm just going to work over here in my kind of test area. But gouache is fun to work with. As you can see, it goes down velvety smooth. It will dry lighter than the color it is when you actually lay it down, but that's typical of most paints anyway. And if you really want to, you can create transparency effects with it, and the color still remains fairly brilliant. So for, say, the purposes of this project, which I've already begun, I have some paint that I'm actually reconstituting because I started it previously. So now I'm going back in and mixing more water into the paint and getting it back to the consistency that I can work with it. I work with 2 buckets of water. This is to mix the water into the paint. This is to wash the brush. But your mixing water should stay fairly clean. When you have enough water in your paint pot and you're ready to paint, get your brush wet first. Don't go in with a dry brush. The dry brush will actually start sucking up the paint into the ferrule, which is the metal part of the brush, and it will come out at odd times when you don't want it to. And also it'll kind of disappear in there. So you want to get your brush wet and then wipe off all the excess. Got a little bit of color in there. That's better. So you come in with a damp but not wet brush and pick up some of the paint. And then some of this is already painted, but just start laying in the paint. And I usually recommend painting around the edges or the outlines of your shapes first, and then filling in the central areas of it. So basically outline the shape first and use a light hand. You can use the side of your brush, you can use the tip of your brush. And so you can do a lot of different things with one brush. And so we're just basically laying on the color. In the smaller, tighter areas like this, you want to make sure that you're using the smaller brush. And for larger areas, you can use the larger brush. One of the things too, as you're painting, is that you want to be able to turn the surface that you're working on. And that way you're not trying to paint like this, but you can kind of keep everything out in front of you and control your paint, control your edges better. One of the things about gouache is that it blends really easily with itself, even when it's dry. And so you kind of want to paint shapes side by side rather than painting everything all one color and then trying to paint over, because when you paint over, it's actually going to start lifting up the color underneath and blending it. And for some things, that's a really good thing, but for this project, you want to keep everything really pure. And so if you happen to paint over or glitch your paint in some area, like there's a random brush stroke right here, and we want to actually cover that back over, we can do that by layering the original color into that area very lightly and letting it dry. If you go in and go too heavy with your brush, it's going to pull everything up. And you're actually going to end up seeing paper underneath. So you're going to basically ruin that area. So when you're painting and you do make a mistake and go too far, or you drip color somewhere where you don't want it, you can go back and salvage it with the gouache, but just understand that you need to do it very carefully. And the idea is, when we're dealing with this, to paint it as carefully as possible at first and only make minor mistakes. If you do make a mistake, wait till it dries and then go back and fix it. It will be okay. I've had situations in the past where I've actually had to start a painting over again, and that wasn't fun. So just kind of go carefully. Don't get your attention distracted by other things as you're doing this. Kind of make sure you're watching what you're doing, and you're keeping your water buckets and everything away from your painting surface so you don't drip back in onto your painting surface, because that will also affect how your painting surface turns out.